Welcome to the Apart But Together Expanding Our Community Virtual Summit. My name is Laura Terrill. I'm a Senior Associate for Professional Development with the National Foreign Language Center, and it is our pleasure to be part of this community effort and this virtual summit. My topic today, Planning for Learning, Less is More, accurately describes where I believe so many others are today. We have so much to do. So many thoughts whirling through our heads, some professional, many personal, that it might be the opportune moment for all of us to step back and ask ourselves, what can we take out? So our goals today are to really think about what matters while making clear connections between daily lesson goals and unit goals. And second, to look at a couple of strategies for working effectively with authentic text in order to meet those lesson and unit goals. This aphorism that came from the Coalition of Essential Schools, Less is More, tells us as educators that learning actually can occur more deeply and more efficiently if we do less with the available time that we have. And never has that been more true than when we're trying to juggle what will probably be a blended learning experience in the fall. And in order to think carefully about what it is that we take off of our to-do list, we're going to have to look at and develop a don't-do list. And this actually comes to us from the business community. The idea that if we want to be truly efficient and truly effective, then we have to use our time more wisely. We cannot keep adding to our list of things to do, and there's a great temptation to do that. Educators in particular are really learners and always looking for the next thing. But what's important to do is to take things off of our to-do list. And so as you attend sessions throughout this virtual summit, please be thinking about, yes, what else do you want to do? But for everything that you put on your to-do list, I challenge you to take two things off of your list, your current reality. One way to do that is to always ask the question, why before how? And so when you're getting ready to add something to a to-do list, or to think about what you're going to be able to do, or what you are going to do with that next unit of instruction, ask yourself first, why am I doing this? Because why helps you to think through the reason for the decision. It actually allows you, and in some cases forces you to put some things on that don't do list. It is hard to find an answer to why 14-year-olds would want to talk about chores, or why we need to teach direct and indirect object pronouns in a level 1 course. And when the answer is not immediately obvious, it's probably a signal to us that we need to do some rethinking about what we do and why we do it. We know that curriculum functions as a mirror. Quality curriculum allows us to get to know ourselves better. Through what we study, through what we read, through what we examine, we come to a deeper understanding of who we are and our place in the world. It's that I-centered part of curriculum. But it's equally important that curriculum function as a window, that through the learning, our learners are learning more about the world that they live in, so that they're constantly looking outward as they learn more about who they are. When my colleague Donna Clementi and I wrote Keys to Planning for Learning, we tried to find an image that would reflect this notion that curriculum is dynamic, that it's functioning both as mirror and window. And we said in the book that all units have to focus on self, community, and the world. And that's from the very youngest age. You want students to, of course, be able to talk about themselves, but you want them to learn more about the community they live in and more about the world they live in. And it is those three overlapping circles that actually develop the interculturality that is part of our can-do statements. We know that we want them acting on this information in all three modes of communication, and we know that the content of those units is anchored by the World Readiness Standards. So we're given through our standards, through our modes of communication, and through the notion of interculturality, this broad-based picture of what quality curriculum looks like. We also know that we are going to backward design both units and lessons. We have to know day in and day out, what is the goal of our learning? Why are we doing what we're doing? And our students, our learners, have to know this also. We have to have evidence. How will I know that each individual learner has reached that goal, both at the lesson level and at the unit level? And finally, when I plan for that, I'm ready to actually design a specific lesson. If I try to jump into the lesson before I know the purpose, the lesson might have quality, it might engage them, but it may not result in any deep learning. Or worse, it may result in students who say, "Did we do that yesterday? I don't remember doing that." And what that signals is that we didn't have all of the key component pieces in place in order to effectively anchor learning. We don't have time in this session to really look at a total unit or to really look at a total lesson. So what I wanted to do was separate out a unit, talk about it a bit, and then show you some of the lesson components for that. My thought is that as we start the school year in the fall, we are going to have to begin with units that allow us to get to know our students better. So we're not going to start the year with a review unit, which has been traditional practice in the past. We're just going to jump in. We're going to design a unit that lets us get to know them, that brings in that social emotional learning, and really helps us to build community. This might be such a unit in a level 1 course, a level 2 course. Contemporary life, because any unit can be structured up or down, but I wrote these ideas to be in that performance range of novice high, intermediate low. So if we take contemporary life, the AP theme, we frame it as a day in the life, and we look at, okay, I want my learners to function at the sentence level. And certainly if I'm doing this in level 2, I want them to begin to take some risks and create with language. And we operate under an essential question that's interesting, relevant, provokes critical thinking, invites inquiry, and importantly, is answerable in the target language by learners in the class. We've got the framing of a good unit. How does where we live impact what we do and how we feel? And so a question like this invites differentiation. Students who are novice, mid, novice, high can tackle it. Students who are intermediate, low can tackle it. The question is approachable at this level. With that in place, we're ready to make sure that we are bringing in an intercultural focus. Remember that we have to focus on self, community, and world. So if I look at the rights of the child, I'm certainly bringing in worldwide elements. If I look at variation in daily, yearly routines and schedules, I have the elements of culture there. So I have an idea of what authentic resources I'm going to reach out, find, identify in order to do self, community, and world and create that intercultural perspective in this unit. Then I'm ready to look at my unit goals. And so here's where the full unit is actually in that Google document that you can be accessing. But I just lifted out the 2 goals that I'm going to be working on right now. I'm going to want students to be able to identify basic rights, and I want them to compare how they spend their days with others. So 2 of the basic rights come to mind immediately. I might be asking students to think about their days at school and whether children in other countries go to school. What percentage of literacy do we have around the world in different countries? Or I might be looking at children who work at a young age in some countries and how they have free time. So I have many options to bring in this unit in terms of comparison. And what I compare is going to depend on what I find that's approachable and accessible at this performance range. But the second one is bringing in that social, emotional, and getting to know you aspect of a unit. Connect what they and others do with how they feel. So it may be teaching a formulaic phrase. When I talk to my friends, I feel happy. Or when I do math, I feel stressed. And so by planting a sentence frame, I can actually get learners at a younger performance range to deliver more complex thinking, more complex thoughts, and approach their cognitive level better. So I've got my essential stage 1 aspects in place. I have the unit idea, I have my intercultural focus ready to go, and my unit goals are in place. I know what I want my learners to be able to do. So I'm ready to start to think about assessment. And when we think about assessment, we think about assessment in the 3 modes. And when we look at the 3 modes, we know that in daily life, we use the interpretive mode and the interpersonal mode the majority of the time. And so when we're teaching, we want to keep our focus there and bring in the presentational mode to support that also. So I put the goals back at the top because I want to make sure that as I develop assessments, I'm thinking about my goals, thinking about my essential question. So I might be asking them in the interpretive mode to look at an authentic text and identify what young people or families do, and just categorize the types of activities. An infographic could be good for that. Interpersonal, I might want them to ask and answer questions about profiles of others and determine key similarities and differences. And maybe in that visual, they'll create a visual representation of how they spend their days. And then they can use that visual profile in the interpersonal to talk to each other, and also in the presentational to compare their daily life in their day to the life of someone else. Once I've done that, I can decide and plan for the functions, the structures, and the vocabulary that I need. And this is a bit opposite of the way we've planned in the past. An original textbook approach would give us a list of vocabulary to learn and then some new grammar rules, and we would finally put it together. But in that concept of backward design, we're going to work on doing things with language. That's the house. We're building the house. The tools to build the house are the vocabulary and structures that we need. And so I get to decide as a teacher, in order to express frequency, saying when and how often I do things, then what structures and patterns do they need? They're going to need interrogatives, adverbs, negatives. So I know that I'm going to be working with those concepts. Or if I want to compare daily and yearly schedules, I'm going to need to be able to say, well, on Mondays, I do this. What do you do? And I'll need words like daily and weekly and monthly and every other week. And I'll need time at 2 and at noon. And I'm going to have vocabulary related to these words, the high frequency activities or the days or the months, words that I know they need. So I get to call a very specific vocabulary list that will help my learners meet these specific goals. The full unit has many more on it. So with that in mind, you can start to decide, what will I do with an authentic text? And I want to give you a few examples. And so in this mindset for working with authentic text, actually, I'm going to stop here and say something. I had the pleasure of listening to all 70 sessions for the virtual summit. And someone, I believe in one of those sessions, said, if you're trying to select a text and you can't think of at least 3 activities to go with it, look for another text. And I think that was a very concrete piece of advice. And I can't remember who it was now, or I would use your name. But really, we're asking ourselves, how does this authentic resource connect to the unit goals? What lesson can do statements are addressed? Because I've already planned my goals. I know what I want to do. So now I'm looking for those tools that will help me to build those goals. And finally, what are some activities? So I don't really get to plan my activities. I don't get to select my tech tool until I know the purpose of the resource and the goal of the activity. Then I can go out and find the tool that's going to help me do that. So when we work with text, there are a couple of things that we can just use as frames of reference for every text we acquire. We need to set the purpose for working with the text. That may be done in the interpersonal and presentational modes. We may be activating prior knowledge, asking them to make a prediction, asking them to jot down some questions about an image, even having them discuss it from an image before they read. Then we're going to go into the actual during reading, which needs to be very focused. It also needs to be done individually, silently, but they need a task to keep them alert while they read, because we've all had the experience of reading to the end of the text without realizing that we read the page, and then we have to go backwards. And then after we read, what are we going to do with it? Why did we read? We didn't just read to read. Even when we read a novel, we often go to a book club to discuss it, or we're reading for specific information in order to be able to embed a new tool into Zoom. We have a purpose for reading. When you think about it and you look at the schematic, it's the during reading that's really the interpretive mode. The before and after are very likely to be interpersonal and or presentational mode activities. So let's take something like Edpuzzle. When they're watching Edpuzzle, they're in the focused mode, they're during. But we can ask ourselves, what did we do to set the purpose for that video? And what are they going to do after the video with the knowledge that they acquired from it? So there you're looking at that sort of 3-step process and multiple activities out of one resource. So let's just look at this particular activity. It's very short, it's approachable. I have decided to focus in on the day in the life, and here's Malala, who advocates that all children go to school. I have been looking at images, and we've been talking about connecting the world to the vocabulary and looking at pen and, looking at this young man and, well, he must be the child. And, we're learning the words, we're learning the vocabulary, but we're learning them in a specific context. I'm not holding up a pen and saying, what is this? I'm working with words in the context that the learners are going to use them. And that quote here on this slide, it's interesting, and I could show it, and I could ask them to just read it. But what I could have done before I did that was ask them to take a stab individually, reading individually, at putting those words in a logical order. Then they can compare with their partner to see if the order matches. We can reveal 1 or 2 at a time and let them work a little bit more before we jump right into showing the quote. So the goal is to ask yourself, how can I make my students work harder on every text that I find and what to use? And then when I extend it, what can I do with this text? Well, in this case, I've decided that here it translates as a child, a teacher, a book, and a pen can change the world. Well, let's say that I want to work on this notion of can. I can change the world. So I can show sentences that put a verb in context and ask students to look at that verb to try to see the pattern of what's going on when I show a child can change the world, a teacher can change the world, a book can change the world, a pen can change the world, a girl can change the world, a boy can change the world. All of those sentences use PEUT, P-E-U-T, then why is the one at the top PEUVENT, P-E-U-V-E-N-T? Can we come up with an idea of a grammar rule? So grammar now is pop-up and embedded. And then we can ask them to apply that. Is it PEUT or PEUV? I'll give you an example. I promise you the very first one was written a long time ago. A president. Are you going to use PEUT or PEUV? Are you individually applying the rule correctly? Has your brain seen the pattern? Compare with your partner. Did you get it right? Let's do a few more. Let's see if you can figure this out and formulate these rules on your own. Then we can extend it even further. Can you change the world? I can change the world. I can. And so we're moving from before, during, after, and all of a sudden one simple quote has become 2 or 3 days of lessons, which means that they're hearing words in context up to that 20 times that they say that it takes to really learn and embrace a word. We're not saying repeat after me. We're not looking at grammar rules in isolation. It is being embedded through the authentic text. When they're doing different things, I am looking to see what it is that they are doing. And I'm hearing them. Did I hear so-and-so say that they can do this to change something? Well, then I'll check it off. And this is formative assessment. And this may be enough assessment if we're online more than we're in the classrooms. We need to make sure that day in and day out, learning is taking place. And that's going to be critically important in the classroom or online. But I believe we lose that constant facial touch, that recognition that someone is falling behind when we're not actually seeing all aspects of their body language. So I believe we have to attend to it with more deliberation, perhaps. Not sure, because I haven't actually done that. Let's get one more example with the time that we have left. So here is an article that came out of a fabulous resource for French teachers, Un jour, une actu. And it is about 5 children who are in quarantine, the word is confined, on 4 different continents. And I've translated it into English for those of you that do not speak French. And you're thinking to yourself, this is great. We'll read this. This looks interesting. These are young people, and I have young learners, so they'll probably be interested in this too, and I'll read it with them. No. And your second thought might be, well, I'll make up a worksheet and they can answer some questions. No, because a tenet of less is more is you want to do less. You want your students to do more. So how do you make the student the worker? Well, you might show 5 pictures and then ask them, well, what are the 5 continents? That's interesting right there. 5 continents? 5 continents. We have 7, don't we? Well, in France, they learn that there are 5. Now we're off into interculturality. We're exploring the world from different perspectives. So let's predict. We've got some clues, right? So which child lives in the US? Which child lives in Europe, and which child lives in America, and which child? Let's just predict. But can you get it right? And that's a good activity too, because you're going to be stereotyping these young people. And then we can give some names and ages, and they can match them. And which child is most like you and why? Well, this draws on prior knowledge. Can they say, well, I like strawberries, so I'm really like so-and-so. Or skateboarding, I like to skateboard. I like to cook, so I am like, okay, I'm athletic, so I'm like. So all that's going to take time. It's not necessarily going to be done in one lesson. You might do 1 and 2 and then come back to it. So you get to vary it. So now let's look at each picture individually, because each child, of course, had their own paragraph so that they could think about who it was and what they were doing and what their name was and where they lived. So you're matching in another way now. And we'll go through this, and we can pull out images and pictures and match those images that we find to words in the article. We can make predictions about this young girl. Does she live in? So now I'm introducing my new vocabulary in context. Does she live in Switzerland or Australia? And then, of course, students would only see the French. The English is there for you. What does she like to do based on the image? How old do you think she is? Did you stereotype her? Did you put her in Singapore because she looks Asian? So it brings up an opportunity to segue off and look at something about stereotypes. How does where I live impact who I am, how I feel? We're thinking about this essential question through the activities that we choose to do. And then you've got the reading to actually do. So you're asking yourself, at every step, what can I do? Now there were 5. We might do 4 together in class, and I'll save the 5th one for an independent assessment, because they've gotten much better at reading this style of writing based on what we've done in class, and then they can approach a text they haven't seen before for the first time as part of their assessment. And again, you can keep that running record. Are they able to do what I'm asking them to do? And so here's one more in that interpersonal vein. Can I talk about how I feel today? Why I feel the way I do? What I miss? If I were teaching a class, it would be one of the first French expressions I taught. What did you miss the most? I missed. And it's a hard one in French too, but as a memorized phrase, it's pretty easy to handle that phrase. So let's think about this really well this year. Think deeply. I believe that despite all the challenges of the virus, it's giving us an opportunity to rethink what we do and why we do it. And so it's okay to say, I don't need to do this any longer. I'm going to prioritize the things that are going to make a difference for myself and for my learners, focusing more deeply on what seems to really matter in our language classrooms. I do want to remind you that there is a Google form that goes with this session, and I invite you to comment, to ask questions. If I went too fast and you paused it, add your question in. I will go in and check that from time to time, and I would be happy to answer those questions. But I want to say thank you, and thank you to all of you for making this virtual summit, the first of its kind, a true success. Enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you.